grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worry on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear a pitter-pat? And that happy tune is your step. Life can be so sweet on the sunny, sunny, sunny side. I'm your host, Todd Gross, and I'm a clinical psychologist and director of a group practice, Adams Street Associates in Newton. And our show on the sunny side.
We are thankful for the trees of the forest which give us shade. We are thankful for the beautiful song of the birds, and for the warm rays of the sun, and for the bright stars in the night sky. And we are thankful for all the lessons.
Because there really are several miracles involved in this story. Sometimes you hear a story that really makes you so moved that you really want to cry. And that's what we have today. And lucky enough to have with us to tell the story is Nelson DeWitt. Hi, Nelson.
Hi.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I'm glad you're here. As a postscript for the audience, I want to say that I first met Nelson just a few weeks ago in Costa Rica when my daughter was there, and she wanted to get together with him because they had been in the same camp together, and I learned about this story, and I think it's a story that we can all learn from, and it really needs to be told. So, Nelson, thank you for coming here to tell us, and maybe just to start, can you say just a little bit about your, ahead of time, your life in Newton, how you've grown up in Newton, a little bit what that's about.
Well, I grew up in Auburndale. My father was the president of LaSalle College for 19 years, and he just recently retired, moved up to New Hampshire. So I grew up in the area, went to Williams School, went to Beaver Country Day with my younger brother, and then I went to Worcester Polytech for 3 semesters. Where I studied computer science, and then I transferred to Wentworth back in Boston to do business.
Cool. Now that's the end of the story, but the beginning of the story is pretty amazing. So I wonder if you could take us through a little bit of how you got to end up in Newton, the whole story behind that we really want to focus on today.
All right. So my parents were revolutionaries in the war in El Salvador in the early 80s, and well, late 70s, early 80s.
Yes.
And they were fighting. I mean, El Salvador was a country where 95% of the wealth was controlled by 5% of the population, and everyone else was very poor. And they were fighting to try and make it better for everyone, including their children and everyone else in the country. My father was more of a bodyguard, and my mother did logistics, and they were in the war, and my father was shot about an inch away from his heart, and he had to have surgery. Actually, he laid in the mountains for 3 days without any medical help before he was able to get out of the country and receive medical attention. And so that in itself is a miracle that he made it alive.
Yes, it is.
And my mother, like I said, did logistics, and I think this was probably around 1980, and she was starting to feel that it wasn't the safest environment for her children, obviously.
Yes, that's your mom that we just saw on the screen there.
Yes, that was my mother. And so she wanted to get out, and I don't think the movement wanted to let her go, so they said to her, one more mission. We're going to send you on one more mission. And around this time, it had become unsafe for her and the rest of my family to live in El Salvador.
Yes.
So my grandmother took my older brother and my older sister to Costa Rica to get away from the war. And I was just born, and I stayed with my mother, and we went to Honduras, where her and a couple other revolutionaries, they kidnapped a businessman, and they held him for ransom, and that's kind of the way that they made money, to sustain what they did. And the Honduran government found out that they were there, and they stormed the house, and they killed the people that they found. And my mother was able to make one last phone call to my grandmother saying, take care of the children. And that's the last we ever heard from her.
So sad.
Yeah. And we really don't know what happened to her, but we assume that she died in that fight.
Yes.
And during that time, I was in the back room when they stormed the house, and the police found me and they took me out, and they brought me to an orphanage. And this is a picture of me probably a few hours after everything happened.
I see.
After they stormed the house, and before I was brought to the orphanage. And I was 1 year old. I just turned 1. That was, I think, 8 days after my first birthday.
Yes.
And so I went to the orphanage. I stayed there for about a year, and the government, they didn't know what to do with me, so they eventually decided to put me up for adoption. And around April of 1983, my parents here in America were just starting the adoption process. I mean, they were probably a year away, and they received a phone call from their agency, and they said, "We have a child for you, except that they have no photo, no history, and you have until 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon to decide."
God.
Yeah, so they didn't get a lot of sleep, obviously.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what to do, and
Yes.
you know, thankfully they did decide to adopt, and they went down later that month, actually in May.
Yes.
And they spent about a month, you know, doing paperwork and that kind of stuff. And then in late May, I was brought back to the U.S.
I see.
And you know, I grew up here. And
And
really,
not knowing anything of that history, right?
Really, we knew very little about what happened because the government was trying to cover it up and
Yes.
not, you know, they didn't tell us that much about what was going on. In fact, when I was growing up, I didn't even know my birthday,
Really?
my real birthday. So my parents, when I was adopted, they made up a birthday in August 25th. Which is the one that they decided on.
Did you, just curious, did you have, growing up, because there's many adopted kids I've worked with too, did you have questions in the back of your mind, like I wonder what my real parents are like, what my identity?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
And that was, I think, a struggle for me because having so little information, you know, just made it even that much harder because, you know, you don't know who your parents are
Right.
or anything like that, and you wonder who you are. And sometimes I almost felt like the first 2 years of my life, it didn't exist. You know, there was this huge hole.
Big hole, yeah, vacuum.
Yeah, and just wondering, you know, what happened there? Who was I? Where did I come from? So we really had no way of finding my family, and we were kind of stuck.
Yes.
I had always thought, you know, like, I think freshman year in high school, I had started to think about, you know, well, maybe senior year, I can go down to Central America and look, you know,
Find
and
out
start to
something,
search.
yes.
You know, so I wanted to know what happened, but I also, at the same time, knew it was very hard
Yes.
to you know, find that,
Sure.
be able to find them. So in 1992 or 93, when the war was over, my grandmother decided to go back to Costa Rica and start looking for me. And this was, you know, a lot of people told her, don't do it because it would be
Risky.
dangerous. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. I mean, the war had just ended and, you know, very dangerous situation. But she, you know, I think it was very hard for her and the rest of my family as well to lose not only my mother, but me. So she took a baby picture, the one baby picture that she had of me, and she went door to door asking people, you know, do you know have you seen my son, my grandson?
Yes.
Have you seen my daughter?
There's that picture of you. How did they respond, Nelson, when she would try to ask them?
My sister has told me that they slammed a lot of doors in her face, and they didn't
Yeah.
want, because, you know, they were revolutionary, so, you know, they didn't want to be
Yes.
associated with that.
A lot of fear, too, I'm
Right.
sure.
I'm sure. But luckily, after, I think, a year of searching, she found an organization that was willing to help. And it's called Pro Búsqueda.
Yes.
And they specialize in finding children that were separated in the war in El Salvador. See, what happened for a lot of children is the government would go and steal children away from their parents as a way to punish the supporters of the revolution. And then those children would go up for adoption. And they, even though my story was a little different from those children who were stolen from their families, they decided to help.
Thank God there was an organization like that. It still is.
Yeah, they're still doing work, and I believe there are a few hundred missing cases still, or unsolved cases that they're working on. Yeah. So this is a sort of bigger problem, and the Salvadorian government still hasn't said yes, this was they still haven't admitted, acknowledged what happened. So she went to this organization, they agreed to help, and they spent 3 years digging through papers and any public records that they could find, and they found out that I was adopted to a couple in America. They found out our names, and then, interestingly enough, they did an internet search and found our phone numbers.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa. Amazing. So, amazing. This is, just keep going. It's an amazing story.
So it was funny because it was, you mentioned the camp connection in the beginning.
Frank A. Day, for those who are watching. A lot of people know that from the Newton Y camp. Yeah,
Camp Frank A. Day. Where me and my brother went for several years, and we had just gone. This was the summer of 1997. It was the first day they dropped me off at camp, and my dad was at home in Newton.
Okay.
And he receives this phone call, and the guy on the other end says, "Did you adopt a son in 1983 by the name of Nelson Ward DeWitt?"
Whew. Gets you chills up your spine, yes.
Again, this was also like at 9 o'clock at night,
Yes.
And he almost dropped the phone.
Yeah.
Because how would anyone know this? Was this his birth family looking for him, or,
Yes.
And he was someone from another organization called Physicians for the Human Rights.
Yes.
And they do the DNA testing for probúsqueda. And
to verify that.
Right, exactly. So he kind of briefly told my dad, who they were, what they did, and the story, and they sent a FedEx package the next day to him where it could read the report of everything that happened and how they discovered, how they tracked me down. And they sent pictures and and they decided not to tell me until I came back from camp because, there's a visiting day halfway through.
Yes,
and
I
it
do
would
know
be
that.
very difficult to,
a bit of heavy news to lay on you at that moment, yes.
Yeah, it would be a little difficult to say, hey, we found your family, but now we have to,
So you went through the whole summer?
Right.
Okay.
So I went.
Not knowing,
And they had, I guess, plenty of time to think about it.
Yeah, it must have been amazing for them.
Yeah. So I come home the last day of camp, and after dinner, my parents sit both me and my younger brother down, and we were a little confused at first, like, what's going on?
What did we do wrong?
Yeah, right. And I remember my dad, he takes out, I think it was a newsletter that they sent us, and he points to the front picture, and he goes, this is a doctor, I forget his name, who was on the cover, but he's like, this is a doctor, and he works with children in Central America, and for whatever reason, at that point, I knew found my family.
Just knew, yeah.
And you couldn't have told me otherwise, but I knew that was my family, and I had found them. And they began to tell me the story about, how my family were in the revolution, how they fought, and how it was separated from my birth family. And shortly after, one of the things, the way that probúsqueda approaches the families is they realize that these are, it's adopted families, and this is going to be quite a shock, to have these
some
people.
Appreciation of how much they've invested in you and what you mean to them, and what this would mean to them.
Yes, exactly. So they take this approach where you find out first that you have a family in Central America, and then it's on you to make that contact. And there have been cases where people are unsure, if they want to do that, you know,
Right,
because it's very
sure.
difficult.
Yes.
But I wanted to get the DNA test, and
So you were
know,
really like, I want to find out. I
Yeah.
want to meet these people.
yeah,
I want to
mean,
connect.
we could tell by the pictures that they sent us that you know, my brother and I happen to look a lot alike, so it wasn't very difficult to tell that we were related. But this kind of,
Yes.
you know, made it official that we were related.
Wow, it's so amazing.
And we planned, you know, so this was August that we found out. We did the DNA test, and that came back maybe around this time, you know,
Yeah.
10 years ago, around this time. And then we rushed to get plane tickets to Central America for Christmas.
Which meant that your adopted parents were definitely on board with you, like, we're going to
Yes.
follow this through with
Yes, yeah. And I think they were obviously a little nervous in the time leading up. And, you know, one of the sort of defining moments that my dad, my adopted father, told me about later was I received this letter from my father in Central America, and it came in the mail, or it was a group of letters, and I got it, and, you know, I come home first from school, and I was looking at it, and then he came home and he says, "How was your day?" You know, he calls up to me, and I was like, "I got a letter from my dad," you know, and he was just like, you know,
Yes.
I'm sure that was very difficult to hear because, you know,
Yes. He's been your dad.
Right, exactly. And they were very nervous, I think, that, you know, they didn't know this family. What if they were a bad influence? What if I wanted to stay? I think my younger brother was also very nervous about that.
Yeah.
He was 12, so he kind of felt, oh, maybe I'm losing my older brother.
Yes, of course. Yes.
I, on the other hand, I never really, that didn't really cross my mind, you know. For whatever reason, I was just, you know, this was my family, you know, and it didn't, you know, there was no real conflict of interest for me for whatever reason. So December, we go down to Central America.
Yeah.
And we, you know, we fly in and we get to the airport, and as I'm walking out, I see, you know, this man, older man who looks like me, and
Oh,
this little girl
God.
come towards me. And they both kind of like hug me.
Oh, God.
And you know, and then it's kind of all a blur from there. I don't remember much because it was, you know, it met my brother, my sister, my grandmother, you know, all these family, and we had.
You have a picture
know,
there. Oh,
yeah.
This is of the reunion?
Yep, that's all of us. And
Unbelievable.
and
Look
that's-
at that.
my father on the far left.
Okay.
My grandmother's next to him.
Yes.
Next to him, then my brother, my older brother. That's me in the middle. My sister.
Who I met. That's
Yes.
Ava, right?
Yes, that's Ava, and my stepmother, and then in the bottom is my half-sister, my younger half-sister. So
Oh, my God.
that was us the very first night that we met, and you know, after that it's all kind of a blur. It's really, you know, we have this other picture. And it's kind of shaky, and there are all these lines, and it kind of describes the emotions that were, you know, it was just
Yes.
a complete rush. And then we, you know, head back to the hotel, and I remember sitting in the car with my little sister next to me, and it was this, you know, this unbelievable feeling to finally have found your
Look
family.
at that, yes.
Yeah. After all these years, you know.
It must be hard to put into words what that must have felt like for you.
It is, because it's really, you know.
Piece of yourself, too.
Yeah.
You rediscover.
Yes, and I think it's funny, one of the things that I realized, you know, right away was that, you know, we did a lot of activities. We were there for a week, so we went, you know, sightseeing and touristy kind of things, and as I'm walking, you know, down the street, I look ahead of me and I'm like, hey, they walk like me, you know, like, and it was really cool to see these people who, you know.
All the mannerisms.
Right,
Yes.
exactly, and especially me and my brother. And,
Oh, is that funny?
yeah, and so we'll be, you know, now that we've got to know each other, like we'll be drinking, you know, a glass of water or something, and then we'll put it down and it'll hit the counter at the same time, and we can hear the noise. And it's just funny because we grew up, you know, thousands of miles apart.
Yet it's, yeah.
And
It's
yet
like
we're
a
so-
puzzle, and all the pieces all of a sudden come together.
Yes.
Amazing. Amazing.
So it was really quite quite an emotional and incredible experience.
How was it with you, between your adopted parents and you know, the rest of the family? How did they seem to react to meeting all these people?
I think they were overwhelmed. I think we all were overwhelmed at first, but we really, you know, over the years and during that week, we really kind of, I think my birth family knew that I was their child and that I grew up with them.
Yes.
And that they weren't trying to take me away, but really trying to, you know, show me the family, and that we were all kind of one big family. And that's
so it
really
wasn't threatening, it was more uniting.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Wow.
And I think my grandmother was a very big part of that.
Yeah, we had a picture a few minutes ago of your grandmother and you. I wonder what you'd want to say about her. I mean, what an amazing, that's another miracle, her persistence to dig and find you. It wouldn't have happened without her. She must be amazing. Very
amazing. I mean, she's 85 and she still goes between Costa Rica and El Salvador very frequently, you know, and she's very, very strong woman, and she's been through a lot. And I mean, her story is another, you know.
Yes, another show. Right.
Yeah. So it's just, it was really great. And one of the things that she did right after we returned home, the first letter that she sent to us after we met was to my younger brother, saying, you know, it was great to meet you, grandson, you know, and just kind of really emphasizing that we were, you know, one big family, and that's really what it's turned into.
That's what I was going to ask you next. What's developed through the years now?
So we've really gotten to know each other well. I think my older sister and I are very close. We kind of have similar personalities. My brother and I share a lot of interest in technology and computers and stuff like that.
Really?
My younger brother Derek studied in Costa Rica for a semester, and he, you know, stayed a little bit with my older sister Ava, and my younger sister Stephanie. And I see her a lot, and she's growing up, and she's almost 16 now.
Wow.
Yeah, and we, you know, she came up here for my college graduation, and I took her to a Red Sox game and all that kind of stuff.
So great.
Yeah, so we've really become one big family, and my parents have helped have helped my sister through college and some of my other cousins.
Really?
Yeah, so it's just been absolutely, you know.
You couldn't ask for a better blending.
Right. And it's really good, but at the same time, you know, I also realize that, like, we're very lucky in the situation. Like, there are a lot of stories that this organization has found that, you know, haven't ended so well.
No, I'm sure. I want to come back to that too, because that's really important. The one thing I wanted to make was, having had a chance to meet you and your sister together for the first time in Costa Rica, one of the things that moved me so much was the affection between the two of you. It was so obvious, and I think hearing the story and then seeing how much you mean to each other was so obvious.
Yeah, really.
The best part of our trip.
Yeah, I think all my brothers and sisters really mean a lot to me, and we mean a lot to each other. And, you know, one of the hardest things for me, I think, was it was almost bittersweet finding my family, because here, you know, I found my family, but the one person, my mother, who I always wanted to see, I would never be able to see.
That's the ultimate frustration and sadness.
And I think that's, you know, maybe something that a lot of adopted children feel, is that, you know, you don't know so much about your brothers and sisters or your father, but you know you have a mother, and that's like the one person that you want to see.
I hear you.
And finding out that I'd never be able to see her was very difficult. And I think it was also difficult for my brothers and sisters, you know, to not have her around and have to grow up, you know, almost on their own in some ways.
I'm really sorry about that, and I feel, I keep remembering your sister Ava saying, it's such a sad story, but what a miracle ending, and how lucky we are. And she has a sense of what you said, both sides, the terrible loss that will always be with you, and also the wonderful thing that you found together and what you've built together.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing, amazing. You mentioned a little bit about other kids, you know, who have less fortunate, and you mentioned some of the organizations. Anything you would like the viewing public to know about resources if there's problems and these, just a little bit about that.
I actually met a couple months ago, I met a group of other Salvadorian adoptees. Some of them had, you know, similar stories as myself.
Yes.
And there's actually one back in April. There's a woman here in, I forget where, but in Massachusetts, who was in the paper, and she was, you know, separated from her family and reunited by the same organization that I was, you know, and, you know, grew up in America and those kind of things.
Sure.
So, we met, you know, there's a group of us now, and we're trying to put together some sort of network where we can talk to other people around the country maybe that, you know, have been through the similar situation, or who are looking for their family or are thinking about it, or unsure.
Absolutely.
And we're kind of putting together this network, which isn't, we're still trying to finalize it and figure everything out.
Sure.
But I guess, I mean, you were asking me where people could go for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I guess the easiest thing to do is if you go to, I have a website, a blog that actually me and my sister have been writing about our story. And if you go to it, it's www.innasmiracle.com.
Okay.
And you can go there and not only read about our story, but also,
other
you know,
people's.
you can contact me, and I can, you know, put you in contact with the other people in the organization that we.
Good, that's great. I also remember, Nelson, you saying when we were in Costa Rica about your stepmother writing a book, too, about this, right?
Yes. Well, actually, one of the things that, one of my summer projects was to write to ebook, to kind of just lay out the story, because it is very complicated, and the short time that we have here doesn't quite cover everything that happened. So I put together this ebook, and it's basically the blog posts that my sister and I wrote, and I put them in chronological order to kind of tell the story.
That's good. That's
and
good.
Then my mother is working on a story that's probably even more detailed about, you know, what it was like for us finding our family, reuniting, and then going back.
That would be a
and
wonderful story to read.
Telling my family story, and then the last chapter that she wrote, which was really, really special, was it's called Imagining Mila, or Imagining My Mother.
Yes.
And so she interviewed all of the family and really tried to picture, like, who this woman was that would, you know, risk her family to fight for a better country, and
better
to do
life for people.
for a better life. And she has this dialogue with her and asks her, you know, like, what were you thinking? What were you feeling?
That would be great to read that.
And it was really emotional to read, but it was very well done. And then the final chapter is going to be about the other children who kind of had their lives torn apart during this war.
I know we only have a little time left. I just wanted to ask you, in general, I mean, you've been through so much, and so much of your life has gotten connected back. Are there any lessons that really hit you from all this experience about life, you know, because you've been through all this? Very quick.
Yeah, it's very hard to say, you know, especially quickly, but just, you know, finding these people, if you're thinking about looking for your family or anything like that, just try it, just look, because you never know what happens. And it may not end like you want. Like wasn't able to find my mother, but I did find something else that was equally
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody for watching, and I hope you'll watch us again on another On the Sunny Side of the Street. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Can't you hear a pitter-pat? And that happy tune is your step. Life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade with those blues on parade.
This is New TV. Watch what Newton can do on Newton Community